Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com, here today with a doozy of a hand. So, let's get our thinking cap on. Also, have a sip of your brain fuel to make sure you're thinking well. And let's get to it. Today, we're reviewing a hand featuring two titans of poker, Phil Hellmuth and Daniel Negreanu. Phil Hellmuth, if you do not know who he has 15 World Series of Poker bracelets. That is, 15 more than I have. He's an absolute crusher with $24 million in live tournament earnings. And his opponent is Daniel Negreanu, who has only 6 World Series of Poker bracelets. He's kind of slacking there. But he does have $42 million in live tournament earnings, putting him number 3 on the all-time money list. And I had the absolute pleasure of interviewing both of them on my YouTube channel recently. So make sure you check out those great interviews at youtube.com/pokercoaching. All right, today we have a hand playing 300 big blinds deep. Daniel Negreanu raises, and Phil Hellmuth has ace-8 offsuit in the big blind. What do you do in this scenario? In this spot, you have a few options really, right? You can fold, you can call, or you could 3-bet. And to make sure that you are 3-betting intelligently and well and profitably, I have a free quiz for you to take. Check it out right now at pokercoaching.com/3bet-quiz. Head over there and make sure you are not making blunders in this scenario. So this is a spot where I think Phil Hellmuth should call essentially every time. But he 3-bets. So I wanted to look at what the GTO solver does because, Phil Hellmuth invented GTO after all. I want to make sure that he is actually doing the GTO strategy that he so thoroughly recommends as the creator of it. So let's take a look at this. The way you read this chart is the hands in bright yellow, all the hands in bright yellow that have a 1 under them, these hands are 3-bet every single time. These are the best hands, right? We see all the good Broadway hands, ace-queen offsuit, pocket 8s, all these hands 3-betting every time. And then also a smattering of other hands that are 3-bet at a lower percentage of the time. For example, we see 9-7 suited, 3-bet 75% of the time. You're going to find the hands that the solver likes to 3-bet are usually the good suited connected hands, like 8-6 suited, 8-7 suited, 7-6 suited. Also some suited aces, suited kings, suited queens, then a smattering of nonsense. And the GTO solver, 300 big blinds deep, actually does not mind the ace-8 offsuit every once in a while. I, with my small brain, would have called. But Phil Hellmuth, with his giant GTO brain, opts to 3-bet this very low frequency hand correctly. And he does go for a pretty big size. Make sure you check out our heads up preflop charts, by the way. They're completely free at pokercoaching.com/HUNL. Those charts there are for 100 big blinds. I realize we're playing 300 big blinds, which is why this chart here is a little bit different than what we have on the site, because when you're playing deep stacked, you have to be very cautious when it comes to putting in a lot of money out of position. Now, it is worth noting, Negreanu went to about 2.5 big blinds preflop, and Hellmuth made it about 10. A lot of people look at this and think, oh man, that's a giant 3-bet. But when you are out of position playing really deep stack, your 3-bet should be on the bigger side because you want to disincentivize your opponent from sticking around in general. And you may say, but if I'm 3-betting mostly good hands, I don't really care if they call, right? I mean, you don't care if you call when you have a good hand, but you don't always have a good hand, right? In this scenario, Phil Hellmuth has his 10% bluff with the ace-8 offsuit. So, you certainly are happy for Negreanu to fold whatever he has. But this is a scenario where Negreanu should and will call a lot of the time. Why? Well, purely because he is in position. Let's take a look at Negreanu's preflop strategy. You may notice aces, kings, queens, jacks, 10s, and ace-king are no longer in the range. That's because those hands opt to 4-bet and just get a lot of money in every single time. Also, you'll see some hands like jack-8 suited at 75%. The other 25% are not folded. Those are also 4-bet. So we do see a smattering of bluffs with suited connected type stuff. And then a lot of calls, right? So Negreanu's going to be calling with a ton of suited stuff here and a lot of good big cards. It is worth noting, I have to imagine Hellmuth is not 3-betting with exactly the GTO strategy here. I don't know what his preflop strategy is, but if I was in Negreanu's shoes, I would have folded out hands like ace-6 offsuit to the 3-bet immediately. Just because I don't think Hellmuth's 3-betting all that much ace-x offsuit. And he wasn't really 3-betting all that much in this match. So that would also lead me to be a little bit cautious. To watch the entire match, by the way, head over to pokergo.com. They have the entire match. It was like 7 hours long. Lots and lots of great poker action and a little bit of drama too. So make sure you check that out on PokerGo. All right, anyway, we go to the flop. Flop comes king, 6, 5, 2 hearts. Phil Hellmuth has zip and pip, absolute nothing. However, this is a spot where you should continuation bet very, very frequently. Why would he continuation bet here? Well, his range is probably going to be in decent shape in this scenario against Negreanu's range, assuming Hellmuth is 3-betting with the GTO range. Let's just take a look and show you what I mean here. Notice, if Hellmuth has all the overpairs, if he has all of the, well, overpairs like overpair to the 6, if he has ace, king, king, queen, king, jack, king, 10, lots of those, and his bluffs are coming from a lot of the low suited connected type hands like 8-7, 9-8, 8-6, 7-6, 6-5. All of those hands connect really well with this board. However, if Hellmuth's bluffs do not come from those hands, maybe he's 3-betting all the ace-x offsuit for all I know, then his range is going to be very garbage. So as your range connects better and better with the board compared to your opponents, you should be betting more and more often. So this is a scenario where I think Hellmuth wants to be betting frequently and small. Hellmuth instead goes for about a 60% pot bet. Let's take a look at what the solver does, assuming Hellmuth has the GTO range. Again, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. That's what we're working on today, or working with today. As we can see here, the GTO solver recommends a small bet of 20% pot with everything. Pretty much everything. Checking only 5% of the time, basically none. Betting a little bit bigger, 60% pot, almost none. We see the ace-8 offsuit here, like every other hand in the range, pretty much goes for a 20% pot bet every single time. So perhaps a bit of an error from a GTO point of view for Hellmuth right off the bat using a bigger bet size. And Negreanu actually talked about this. Negreanu has a YouTube channel where he reviewed this exact hand. Make sure you check that out at youtube.com/dnegspoker. I'll put a link to that video below in the comment section on YouTube. So this is a spot where facing a small bet, Negreanu should call a ton. But facing a bigger bet size, he should start folding out some really weak hands. By the way, the nice thing about a small bet is that you really force Negreanu to stick around with a lot of hands that are pretty bad, because he's getting such amazing pot odds and he has position, which is going to allow Hellmuth to then continue barreling a lot of hands on the turn in the river and make Negreanu then fold out for a bigger pot when he's sitting here with like random queen high and whatnot, right? Whenever you start going bigger, it kind of forces Negreanu to just play a little bit better. So in this scenario, we see facing this bet size, Negreanu should mostly call. And he does get to fold out some of the quite bad hands in this scenario. He's mostly folding out hands that do not have a backdoor flush draw. Remember, there are 2 hearts on the board, king, 6, 5. So he's folding out like ace 9, no heart, which is fine, right? It's also folding out like queen 9, no flush draw, which makes sense. To be fair, like I said, if Hellmuth bet bigger in this scenario, queen 9 of clubs for backdoor flush draw would have to stick around. But facing this bigger bet size, that hand now gets to fold, and you don't really want to be floating no overcards, backdoor flush draw, right? It's not a great hand. So anyway, this is a spot where Negreanu should call very, very frequently with basically no raises, and that is what happens. All right, turn is the 9 of spades, king, 6, 5, 9. Still 1 flush draw available. And now Phil Hellmuth has to decide, do we go no gamble, no future and start blasting with our ace-8, or do we check? I want you to think about this for a second and write in the comment section below what you would do in this scenario. Would you check? Would you bet small, like 2,000? Would you bet medium, like 4,000? Or would you bet big, like 6,000? Pause the video and write what you would do in the comment section below. All right, I hope you went through this active learning process, because that's going to make your poker skills increase quickly and exponentially. I have over 1,000 interactive quizzes at my training site, pokercoaching.com, where I put you in the shoes of one of our world-class coaches, and then you get immediate feedback as to whether or not the play you made was the right play or not. And that's kind of like having a private coach helping you all the time, whenever you want, on demand. So check that out right now at pokercoaching.com/free to get a free membership. This is a spot where the 9 connects pretty well with Negreanu's range. Now, I know I said that a lot of Hellmuth's bluffs are going to come from these middle connected cards, but he still also does have a lot of random nonsense, right? Like ace-10 offsuit, ace-jack offsuit, etc. So even though Hellmuth does have some nut hands here, like if you think back to the GTO strategy, he has some 8-7 offsuits and all the 8-7 suiteds, he's also going to have a lot of pretty marginal hands here. Also, when you bet the flop with everything, and your opponent calls with only reasonable hands, Negreanu's range no longer contains the garbage, right? But Hellmuth's range still does contain the garbage. So when you bet the flop every time, you essentially must check the turn a decent amount of the time. It's very different than if you bet the flop with only your good hands and your draws, because then your range is quite strong going to the turn. But here, Hellmuth did not do that, presumably. He's betting everything on the flop. Therefore, his range getting to the turn is going to be weaker than Negreanu's range to some extent. And that's going to result in Hellmuth now needing to bet the turn with a polarized range. And in this scenario, your polarized range is going to contain your best hands, probably, if I had to guess, king, queen or better, ace, king or better, somewhere in there. So like good top pairs and better. Strong draws, like flush draws with additional equity, like ace high flush draw, flush draws with an 8, stuff like that, or flush draws with a 7 for a gut shot as well. And then also some really bad draws, like 4-3 or 3-2 suited, obviously, or hands like 7-4, so draws that are not especially great. And I think that's probably what Hellmuth needs to do in this scenario. So this is a spot where I think he needs to be betting this hand, because this is essentially is a weak-ish draw, right? The gut shot with an overcard is not a strong hand, but if you bet and get called, you still have some equity going to the river. So this is a spot where I do like a bet, and I think he wants to bet quite big. When you're betting infrequently, you usually want to be using a big bet size. And Hellmuth does go for a 60% pop bet. Let's see what the solver recommends in this scenario. Let's go through this line by line to some extent to make sure that we fully understand what's going on. So let's take a look at the good hands first. Notice, well, essentially king, queen, and better, ace, king, and better. These hands are betting pretty frequently, about 60, 50% of the time, somewhere in there, about half the time. We see pocket aces betting every time. Interesting to see kings, 9s, and 6s for sets checking sometimes, but I got to presume 2 pair can be betting most of the time, right? Yeah, so king 9 bets every time for top 2 pair. King 6 bets most of the time. King 5 somehow checks a lot. We don't really have very many king 5s. I'm sure that's just a balance purpose thing. 6-5, right? Let's see, 6-5, 6-5 bets. Sometimes, not a ton. 8-7 for the straight bets very, very frequently. So good hands are mostly betting. Now let's look at the good draws. So like ace-x of hearts is betting most of the time. It's kind of hard for you to see here, but I know these are ace-x of hearts. These are all betting most of the time. Random hands with the 8 of hearts, like 8-4 of hearts, probably betting a decent chunk of the time, right? Really not a ton of 8x of hearts here. We see 10-8 for a bad gut shot, betting most of the time, right? Kind of a weak draw. We see 7-4 betting pretty much every time, 4-3 betting pretty much every time, 3-2 betting pretty much every time, which, makes sense. And then let's take a look at the 8s and the 7s. So we see ace-8, which is what Hellmuth has, bets every time, using mostly a big bet size, by the way. In this scenario, when we are betting, which is only about 40% of the time, the bet size that is used most often is a pot size bet with a 60% pot mixed in there as well. Small bet size is not used very often here, so either you're betting like medium or big, which makes sense, right? Because we are betting kind of infrequently. So a lot of the 8x is betting, and also a lot of the 7x is betting. So I realize some of the 7x checks, some of the 8x checks, but we do see that those hands are ones that are used as bluffs a lot of the time. So Hellmuth still has his big brain GTO hat on, 3 bets the ace-8 every once in a while, bets the flop, although he could have gone a little smaller. Keeps betting the turn using a pretty big size. Negreanu now opts to call. Should we spoil Negreanu's hand? Let's do it. Now, Negreanu has the 8-6 of hearts. You may say, wow, middle pair, flush draw, gut shot, straight draw. What more do we want? Let's go back to the beginning of this hand, by the way. I want to point out a few things. In this scenario, he raises, fine preflop, Hellmuth 3 bets, he calls. Some people may look at this and say that this is way too loose, but it's not. In position, suited, connected, it's a great hand. Flop comes, king 6-5. Facing a bet on the flop, this is a spot where you should not raise much at all. Basically never. Remember, go back to, rewind this video just a second if you don't remember. This is a spot where Negreanu calls everything. Even though he has a pair and a flush draw, he's not raising and trying to blast money in the pot, because when he does get it all in, he's not really loving it. He's going to be against a lot of sets and aces and ace-king type hands that, he's fine against, but not loving it. And also, there aren't a whole lot of hands that just want to get a load of money in this scenario. So he just calls like he should. Turn comes 9 of spades, Hellmuth bets, and now I have to presume Negreanu should mostly call here, although you'll find that the solver, when you're in position playing deep stack, sometimes does mix in raises with very high equity hands that kind of lack showdown value, but I don't think that's this hand all that often, because the 6 actually does win sometimes, right? Like, notice in this example, the 6 is good. Typically, when you have a made hand that also has some sort of draw component with it, you usually want to just call, because if you raise and get re-raised, again, you're not loving it. And we know here, Hellmuth could easily have 8-7 suited, he could easily have sets, 2 pairs, etc. So you don't really want to just blast your money in this scenario. You'd much rather call and just play your hand like the marginal pair of 6s that it is. And that is what Negreanu does. Let's take a look at what the solver recommends here. With the 8-6 suited, you see that it does raise some small portion of the time. I have to presume this is probably when it does have a flush draw sometimes, but mostly it does call with the 8-6 suited. Let's take a look at the hands that do raise. Again, I can already tell you before even looking at this, it's going to be very polarized, right? It's going to be the best made hands plus some draws. So what are the best made hands here? That's going to be 8-7 for a straight, raises every time. That's going to be 2 pairs, although it looks like 2 pairs do a lot of calling as well, although 9-6 for some reason does a lot of raising, whereas King 9 does not. Sure, it has to do with blockers. We see sets raising a lot. 9s and 6s raise a pretty good amount of the time, although 5 slow plays. Lots of slow playing going on here. It's kind of an odd scenario, probably because we're super deep stacked. And then a smattering of bluffs. So what are the bluffs in this spot? We see Ace 9 randomly going for a raise. Ace 8 going for a raise, which does make some sense. Jack 4 suited. Got to presume that's a flush draw. 10-4 suited. Got to presume that's a flush draw. Queen 8, Queen 7. Jack 8, Jack 7. So all of these are like gut shots with flush draws or just gut shots, right? Some of these are going to be low equity bluffs. Like I got to presume this Jack 8 is sometimes not a flush draw. So just going for a really like nasty low equity bluff. But remember, whenever someone is taking a polarized line, as Hellmuth does, he's essentially announced now by 3-betting preflop, betting flop, and betting the turn, he has either a good hand or some sort of draw. You don't really want to raise that range all that often unless you also have a hand that is better than Hellmuth's strong made hands, or a hand that is a draw of some sort that you get to balance out your range with. Notice here how Negreanu raises almost none, 12% of the time. So facing this polarizing action, you just don't do a lot of raising. And Negreanu figures that out, and he makes the logical call. River's a fun spot. River's a 7. I have to presume that if Phil Hellmuth missed on the river, he was going to barrel. And you know what? I think it would have worked. I think this is a spot where if the river's a 2, a 3, 4, really any card besides an 8, a 7, or a 6, Hellmuth is going to bet this river, and Negreanu is probably going to fold. Now, I could be very wrong about this. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But I got to presume that in this scenario, if Hellmuth went for it, he would have bluffed. And I think he would have, because it's like a pretty logical spot where your ace high is probably not very good. That said, one of the worst plays some people make, I'm not saying Hellmuth does this, but one of the worst plays some people make is they will 3-bet a bluff pre-flop, bet the flop with the bluff, bet the turn with a logical bluff for a gut shot, right? And then when the river comes a blank, they chicken out and they check, and they just lose every time. And that is a disaster. You couldn't do it any worse. So this is a spot where if you do decide to go for this here in Hellmuth shoes, you do need to keep betting. And sometimes you're going to run into top pair, 2 pair, or a hero call with like pocket jacks or something. And, that's fine. But more often than not, I think you're going to get the bluffs through. And, you certainly do have lots of value hands you would like to play this way, like sets and ace king and aces and whatnot. Anyway, river comes to 7. Seems like a very, very nice spot to go for a bet. This is another spot where I don't think Hellmuth needs to be betting all that often, because who has more 8s in their range? Has to be Negreanu, right? You would presume. But here, Hellmuth does have one of the 8s. He should be betting this hand and also betting with some busted draws. And I think you probably want to go, Hellmuth goes medium, about half pot. That's probably okay here. Let's see what the solver recommends. So solver, funny enough, mixes it up here pretty hard. So who knows what we're actually going to determine. So solver uses a mix of pot size bets, half pot bets, and 20% pot bets, but checking about half the time, right? Again, the board's pretty great for Negreanu, therefore you got to do a decent amount of checking. So let's take a look at what is betting. The big bets are mostly made with 8s, right? We see ace 8 going for a big bet. Really all the 8s going for a big bet. 8-7, 4 straight going for the big bet. The smaller bets are probably going to come from the strong but non-nut hands, mostly, plus a smattering of nuts. And we see pocket 6s, pocket 5s, 6-5. These are all 2 pair / sets are going for small bets sometimes. Pocket aces even goes for a 20% pot bet here for thin value. Some people may look at this and say, it looks like only aces is going for a small bet, right? Therefore, if you bet small here and your opponent raises, you just always have to fold. It may seem that way, except for notice, we do have smatterings of 8s in all of the bet sizes, right? Like 9-8 bets small a lot of the time, whereas 8-7 bets big most of the time, right? So you do have some 8s, so your opponent can't just like mindlessly raise your small bets. However, what a lot of people do wrong is when they do bet small on the river, they just always have a marginal made hand, and that results in them getting crushed, right? You don't want to play really bad. Who'd have thought? If you play bad, you're probably going to lose. If your opponents know what you have due to your betting actions very clearly, then you're going to lose. Hate to break it to you. All right. So let's take a look at the bluffs. What bluffs are used here? I said probably busted draws, right? What are busted draws? That's going to be stuff like we see queen, jack, queen 10, jack 10, betting very frequently in this scenario. These are all obviously no showdown value hands. We see some ace 2 and ace 3 for busted flush draw, betting a lot. 7-4, interestingly enough, betting very frequently, using a big size as a bluff. Notice the pair of sevens is not actually worth a lot, even though we did pair our hand on the river. This 7 very likely does not win at the river. Therefore, it's used as a bluff because it blocks 2 pair and sets, right? 4-3 made a straight, so it's betting, obviously. I say obviously. 4-3 is good enough to bet here. And 3-2 for nothing is betting. So basically, you're betting in this scenario whenever you have something like really strong overpair, pocket aces, and better. And everything else does a decent amount of checking that has showdown value, then the garbage goes for the bet. And Hellmuth does go for the bet here. He goes half pot. Again, going back to the solver, looks like ace-8 mostly goes for a pot size bet, but you know, whatever. He's at this very, very tiny frequency. I'm not exactly sure what total portion of the range here is played exactly as Hellmuth played it, but it's got to be like 1%. 1% of the time, the perfect GTO robot ends up here. I'm going to presume GTO robot Phil Hellmuth did it. He followed the solver perfectly. He used his giant, no gamble, no future brain, and he found the 1% bluff. Good job, Phil Hellmuth. That's magic there for you. All right, over to Negreanu. Seems like an easy raise, right? 8-6 for the straight raises some portion of the time. Notice that every 8 raises. Interesting to see it going for a small raise. Again, solver's very mixed up here, mostly raising with all the straights, right? Sometimes big, sometimes small. Like I said, sometimes your small raise size includes straights. Sometimes it, well, both raise sizes include straights. I knew this was going to be a long video and full of tongue twisters. And then also, let's take a look at some other hands that go for small raises. We see 6-4 as a bluff, 4-3 for value raises, ace-6 bluffs, ace-5 bluffs, ace-7 bluffs, big, interesting to see, ace-10 bluffs, big. So we do see some bluffs in this scenario. And this is a scenario where you got to ask, are we actually playing GTO poker at this point? Because I would not be shocked at all if Hellmuth's range to bet this really bad river for him is going to be mostly straights. So if his range to bet this river is going to be mostly straights, then obviously you should not be bluffing, right? Assuming he's playing perfect GTO poker, though, we do get to get away with some bluffs every once in a while, which is pretty cool to see. In this scenario, Negreanu opted to just call. Why? Well, in Negreanu's video that he made on his YouTube channel, again, make sure you check out the link below, he said that essentially this is a tournament. If I happen to run into the 10-8 every once in a while, I'm out, or I lose a lot of chips, right? And I want to do everything I can to make sure I get to keep playing and maximize the edge that I think I have, which does make a lot of sense. If this was a cash game and you could just always reload, you would definitely raise, right? Easy, no-brainer raise, as we see here. Solver raises every time. But if you, not just think, but if you know Hellmuth will only call a river raise with a straight, let's just presume we know that to be true, then when you have a straight in Negreanu shoes, you should call. And depending on what you think Hellmuth's betting range is on the river, perhaps you should raise a lot. If you think Hellmuth's betting range on the river contains a ton of hands, like sets and 2 pair that will fold, raising with everything could be pretty sweet, right? You could get really exploitative here. That said, I have to imagine Hellmuth is probably on the conservative side when lots of money goes in the pot like it is here. So he probably has a lot of straights to bet to begin with. And when you do raise him, I think he's probably going to overfold in this scenario unless he does have a straight, but his range contains a lot of straights. Therefore, you should not be doing much raising, even with a straight like in Negreanu's shoes. So pretty cool spot where I think the logical play is just raise, right? Straight's almost always good, but you will run into the 10-8 every once in a while, and when you run into the 10-8, it is a disaster, especially if you think you have an edge in the match, as Negreanu has said that he thought he did. So, cool hand. Phil Hellmuth found the 1% GTO bluff. That's always a lot of fun. And yeah, hope you enjoyed it. If you like this video, do me a quick favor, click the like and subscribe buttons below. Also, the notification bell. I know this video was a little bit longer. Let me know if you enjoy going through the GTO strategy, or if you don't, it'll probably be mixed up. Let me know in the comment section below. I read every single comment that you all write. I appreciate you. And I want to make sure you enjoy my content as much as you possibly can. So let me know. Give me feedback. I'm doing my best here to help you improve your poker skills. That's gonna be it for today. Make sure you check out my training site, pokercoaching.com/free, for tons of interactive quizzes, classes, courses, live streams from the best players in the world. Make sure you check that out. It's there for you. I put in a lot of work. Have a great week. Good luck. And I'll talk to you next time. What's big, green, and gives you the freedom to do whatever you want? Yeah, it's money. And if you want to start your journey to a big pile of money, click the subscribe button right over here. See you in the next video.